The shift didn't happen overnight. That's what makes it so difficult to see in real time, because when global alignments begin to change, they rarely do so with a single announcement or a dramatic moment that everyone recognizes immediately. Instead, they move slowly, quietly, through signals that seem isolated at first statements. Here, policy changes there, subtle differences in tone, votes that go a different way than expected. Individually, they don't look like much. Together, they form a pattern. And once that pattern becomes clear, it's often already too late to pretend nothing has changed. That's the stage the world may be entering now, not a sudden collapse of alliances, not a dramatic turning point, but a gradual shift in how major powers position themselves around one of the most sensitive and complex conflicts in the world. Because geopolitics is not static, it evolves, it adapts, it responds to pressure, to events, to public opinion, to strategic interests that don't always align the way they once did. And when enough of those factors begin moving at the same time, the system starts to feel different, less predictable, less stable, more uncertain. That uncertainty is what people are reacting to, because for decades, certain assumptions guided how the world understood this region, who aligned with whom, who supported which positions, who stayed neutral, who acted as mediator. Those roles created a kind of structure, a framework that allowed crises to be managed, even if they were never fully resolved. But when those roles begin to blur, that structure weakens. And when structure weakens, pressure builds, because without clear alignment, every situation becomes more complicated, every decision carries more weight, every reaction is harder to predict. That's what makes the current environment feel so tense, not necessarily because everything has already changed, but because it might be in the process of changing. And that process creates instability because different actors are responding in different ways. Some are becoming more vocal, issuing stronger statements, taking clearer positions. Others are being more cautious, balancing competing interests, trying to avoid being pulled too far in one direction, and others still are looking for opportunity, moments where shifting dynamics allow them to expand influence, strengthen relationships, or reposition themselves within the global system. That's the part that often goes unnoticed. Because while public attention focuses on conflict, major powers are thinking about something else entirely. What does this mean for us? How does this affect our interests? What opportunities does this create? What risks must we avoid? And those questions lead to actions that are not always obvious, because influence doesn't always come from dramatic moves. Sometimes it comes from subtle adjustments, diplomatic language that changes tone, economic decisions that shift priorities, strategic partnerships that quietly deepen. Over time, those adjustments can reshape the landscape, and when multiple countries begin making those adjustments at the same time, the effect becomes significant because it creates a sense of movement. A sense that the balance is no longer fixed, that things are in flux, that the old assumptions may not fully apply anymore. That's when uncertainty spreads, and uncertainty affects everyone because it forces decision makers to operate without clear expectations, to consider possibilities that were previously unlikely, to prepare for scenarios that were not part of the original plan. That's what makes moments like this so complex, because there is no single narrative, no single explanation, no single outcome that everyone agrees on. Instead, there are multiple perspectives, multiple interests, multiple strategies unfolding at the same time, and those strategies don't always align. That's where tension comes from, because when interests diverge, coordination becomes harder, and when coordination breaks down, responses become fragmented. Some push for de-escalation, others push for pressure, others focus on their own priorities, even if it complicates the broader situation. That's the reality of a multipolar world. There is no single center of control, no single actor that can dictate outcomes. Everything is negotiated, contested, influenced by multiple forces simultaneously. That makes the system more flexible but also more fragile, because when something goes wrong, there's no guarantee it can be contained quickly. That's what people mean when they talk about global pressure. Not a unified front, not a single alliance acting as one, but a convergence of reactions, different countries responding in ways that, while not coordinated, still create a cumulative effect, and that effect can feel overwhelming because it comes from multiple directions at once: diplomatic, economic, political, informational, each one adding weight to the situation, each one increasing complexity, each one making resolution more difficult. That's the environment Washington finds itself navigating, not without options but without easy ones, because traditional approaches rely on predictable alignments, clear partners, established channels, but when those become less certain, strategy becomes more complicated because every move must be evaluated not just for its immediate impact, but for how it will be interpreted by multiple actors with different perspectives. That slows decision making, it introduces caution, it forces leaders to balance competing priorities, domestic expectations, international relationships, long-term strategy, short-term stability, and those factors don't always point in the same direction. That's why responses can appear delayed or measured or unclear, not because there is no answer, but because there are too many variables, too many possible outcomes, too many risks associated with moving too quickly or too slowly. That's the challenge of modern geopolitics. It's not just about power, it's about complexity, and complexity requires careful navigation, because in a system where everything is connected, one move can have unintended consequences elsewhere. That's what makes this moment so sensitive, because the stakes are high, not just for one country, not just for one region, but for the broader system itself. Because if alignment continues to shift, if pressure continues to build, if coordination continues to weaken, then the risk is not just escalation, it's fragmentation, a world where cooperation becomes harder, where crises become more frequent, where stability becomes more difficult to maintain. That's the long-term concern, not just what is happening now, but what it leads to. Because every moment like this leaves a mark, it changes expectations, it influences future decisions, it shapes how countries interact moving forward. That's why leaders are watching closely, not just reacting, but analyzing, trying to understand whether this is temporary or part of a larger trend. Because if it's temporary, it can be managed. If it's structural, it requires adaptation, and adaptation takes time. It requires new strategies, new partnerships, new ways of thinking. About influence and stability, that process is already underway, quietly, gradually, behind the scenes. Because while the public sees headlines, decision makers see patterns, and patterns are what drive long-term strategy. That's what makes this moment important, not because everything has already changed, but because the conditions for change are present, and when those conditions exist, the future becomes less certain, more open, more contested. That's the reality now, a system in motion, a balance being tested, a set of relationships evolving in response to pressure, and a world trying to understand what it all means. Because the final outcome has not been decided, it is still being shaped by decisions, by reactions, by strategies that are unfolding in real time. And those strategies will determine whether this moment leads to greater stability or greater tension, whether it reinforces existing structures or accelerates their transformation. That is the question now, and the answer will not come from a single event. It will come from the accumulation of many, because in geopolitics, it's rarely one move that changes everything. It's the sequence, the pattern, the direction those moves take over time, and that direction is still being determined right now.